The first time the old women called her a curse, the wind was howling across the dry plains like it agreed with them. Dust rolled through the broken fences of the small frontier settlement, rattling shutters and whispering against wooden walls as if carrying secrets from the desert itself. In that rough corner of the American West, where survival meant grit and mercy was scarce as rain, a child's fate could be sealed by rumor alone. She was born on a night when the cattle stampeded, when lightning split the sky, and when her mother breathed her last before dawn. By sunrise, the town had already decided what she was. They said misfortune followed her cradle. They said her cry sounded like a warning. They said the land itself rejected her. Her father believed them. His name was Gideon Vale, a man carved from stone and pride, with a jaw as hard as the canyon cliffs and eyes that had forgotten how to soften. Once, he had loved fiercely. Once, he had dreamed of building an empire from dust and cattle, but grief had hollowed him out, leaving behind a bitterness sharper than any blade. When his wife died, bringing their daughter into the world, he looked at the tiny, squirming child and saw not life, but loss. He named her Seraphina. It was a name too radiant for a girl raised in whispers and suspicion. Seraphina grew beneath the wide Wyoming sky, where sunsets burned orange and crimson across endless plains. She learned early that smiles were rare gifts, and kindness came with a price. The other children kept their distance. The preacher's wife crossed herself when Seraphina passed. Ranch hands muttered that cattle fell sick when she wandered too near the barns. Still, Seraphina moved through the world with quiet strength. Her hair shimmered like dark silk under the sun. Her eyes, deep and stormy, held questions she never dared speak aloud. She would sit by the creek at dusk, watching the water glide over smooth stones, imagining a different life somewhere beyond the horizon. Somewhere she was not blamed for storms or sorrow. Her father never struck her, but his silence wounded deeper than any lash. He looked at her as if she were a debt he could never repay. As drought tightened its grip on the land and Gideon's cattle began to die, the old rumors returned with fresh venom. Men at the saloon spoke in low voices about bad luck and cursed blood. Every failed crop, every broken wheel, every lost calf seemed to trace its shadow back to Seraphina. Desperation changes men. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in dying light, riders appeared on the ridge beyond the settlement, their silhouettes cut strong and proud against the horizon. They were Apache. The settlers stiffened. Fear ran quicker than reason. For years, stories of raids and retaliation had drifted across the territory, each tale more exaggerated than the last. But these riders did not charge with weapons raised. They rode with measured purpose, their presence commanding silence. At their head was a warrior known among his people as Thunderhawk. He carried himself like a king without a crown. Broad-shouldered, steady-eyed, with long black hair tied back by a strip of red cloth. He looked not at the buildings or the rifles hastily lifted in warning, but at the land itself, as if reading its wounds. There was power in him, not loud or reckless, but grounded. The kind of power that came from knowing who you were. Gideon Vale saw opportunity where others saw threat. The drought had pushed him to the edge. His debts were mounting. The bank in Cheyenne had already sent a final notice. Pride would not feed him. Pride would not save his ranch. And in the darkest corner of his heart, an idea began to form, twisted and terrible. That night, beneath a sky thick with stars, Gideon rode out alone toward the Apache camp. Seraphina watched from her bedroom window as her father disappeared into the distance. She felt something shift in the air, a tremor in her bones she could not explain. The wind carried the scent of sage and smoke, and for the first time in her life she did not feel cursed. She felt chosen. In the Apache camp, firelight flickered across strong faces and painted stories on leather tents. Thunderhawk stood beside the flames when Gideon approached. The two men regarded one another in heavy silence. They were sons of different worlds, shaped by different histories, yet bound by the same harsh land. Gideon spoke first. His voice did not tremble as he made the offer. Livestock for peace. Supplies for safe passage. Something more. A daughter. Even the night seemed to recoil. Thunderhawk's expression did not change, but his gaze sharpened. He had seen many trades in his lifetime. Horses, weapons, land, but never a child spoken of as if she were a sack of grain. Gideon described her as trouble, as misfortune. It's a burden, He spoke of whispered curses and dying cattle. He tried to mask shame with practicality, convincing himself it was survival, not cruelty. Thunderhawk listened. When Gideon finished, the fire cracked loudly between them, sending sparks into the dark. For a long moment, the Apache warrior said nothing. Then he asked a single question. "What does the girl believe she is?" Gideon had no answer. At dawn, Seraphina was told to pack what little she owned. No tears were shed by the townsfolk. Some even nodded in grim approval, as if a sickness were finally being removed. Gideon did not meet her eyes as he handed her over. He told himself this was mercy. He told himself she would be safer away from the settlement's hatred. Seraphina stood tall, despite the ache spreading through her chest. She wore a simple blue dress, worn at the hem, and carried a small wooden cross her mother had once held. As she approached the Apache riders, fear curled in her stomach, but so did something else. Hope. Thunderhawk dismounted as she drew near. Up close, he seemed even larger, yet his presence did not crush her. It steadied her. His dark eyes studied her face, not with suspicion or contempt, but with curiosity, as if he were seeing something the others had missed. The wind lifted her hair, and in the early morning light, her features glowed with quiet defiance. Thunderhawk did not see a curse. He saw resilience shaped by fire. He saw a spirit that had survived rejection without turning bitter. He saw a woman the desert itself had claimed and refined. Among his people, there was a belief that some souls were touched by the Great Spirit before birth, marked not by misfortune, but by purpose. Those souls often walked through suffering before rising into strength. As Seraphina met his gaze, unflinching, Thunderhawk felt the weight of that old belief settle in his chest. A goddess, the elders would call such a presence. It's not in the way of worship, but in reverence. Behind them, Gideon Vale turned his horse and rode back toward his failing ranch without looking once over his shoulder. Ahead, the Apache riders began their journey south, the plains stretching wide and unknown. Seraphina did not know where they were taking her. She did not know what awaited her among a people she had been taught to fear. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen worth. As the settlement disappeared behind them, and the horizon swallowed the last trace of her old world, Thunderhawk rode beside her, silent but watchful, and far ahead, beyond the next ridge, smoke began to rise from a distant valley. It was not the thin smoke of cooking fires. It was thick, dark, and moving. The smoke on the horizon did not fade as they rode. It thickened, curling into the sky like a warning written in ash. Seraphina kept her eyes fixed on it, her fingers tightening around the small wooden cross in her palm. The plains no longer felt endless and open. They felt watchful. Thunderhawk rode beside her in steady silence. His presence was close enough to offer protection, yet distant enough to give her space. The other Apache riders moved like shadows across the grasslands, alert and disciplined. No one laughed. No one spoke above a murmur. Whatever waited beyond that ridge mattered. Seraphina finally gathered the courage to speak. "Is it your village?" Her voice was soft but clear. Thunderhawk turned his head slightly toward her. "No. Our camp lies beyond the red cliffs. That smoke rises from Crow's Hollow." She did not know the name, but the way he said it told her enough. It carried tension, history, perhaps unfinished business. The land shifted as they rode south. Its flat prairie gave way to rolling hills scattered with sagebrush and mesquite. In the distance, crimson cliffs rose like ancient guardians, carved by wind and time. The beauty of the American frontier felt sharper here, more alive. The sky seemed wider, the air heavier with meaning. Seraphine's heart beat fast, not only from fear, but from something new and confusing. For years, she had been invisible or unwanted. Now she felt seen, even if she did not understand why. Behind her, the settlement she had known all her life grew smaller with every mile. She tried not to imagine her father returning to his ranch, convincing himself he had done the right thing. Gideon Vale had always been ruled by pride and grief, but deep inside, she wondered if he would ever feel the emptiness her absence would leave. Thunderhawk slowed his horse as they approached a rocky overlook. From there, the valley of Crow's Hollow stretched below. Blackened earth scarred the ground. Several abandoned wagons lay overturned. Smoke rose from what had once been a homestead. Seraphina felt a chill despite the sun overhead. "Who did this?" she asked. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened. "Men who believe power is taken by fire." One of the other warriors, a broad-shouldered fighter named Iron Wolf, rode forward. His eyes were sharp, scanning the valley. "Tracks are fresh," he said. "Not more than a day old." Seraphina swallowed. She had grown up hearing stories of frontier violence, of raids and retaliation, of settlers and tribes locked in endless conflict. But seeing the aftermath was different. This was not rumor. This was real. Thunderhawk dismounted, crouching to study the ground. His fingers brushed the dirt lightly, reading it like a book. Seraphina watched him with quiet awe. There was patience in his movements, strength without haste. "You should not be here," Iron Wolf said gently to her. Seraphina lifted her chin. "I have been somewhere I should not be my whole life." Iron Wolf studied her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod of respect. Thunderhawk rose to his feet. "These men are not Apache," he said firmly. "Their tracks are wrong. Their boots are heavy." Seraphina felt confusion ripple through her. If not Apache, then who? Bandits? Desperate ranchers? Soldiers? The frontier was a place where lines blurred easily. Survival often twisted men into something unrecognizable. As they moved carefully into the valley, Seraphine's mind drifted to the night of her birth. The storm, the whispers, the blame that had followed her like a shadow. What if curses were not born with people but placed upon them by fear? Thunderhawk walked close now, his presence protective but not possessive. He had taken her from her father's hands without force, yet he had not explained why. He had called her nothing. He had promised nothing. And still, she sensed something sacred in the way he regarded her. When they reached the remains of the homestead, Seraphina noticed small details others might miss. A child's wooden toy half buried in ash, a cracked mirror reflecting the sky, a Bible scorched but not fully burned. She knelt and brushed soot from the mirror's surface. For a brief second, she saw her own reflection framed by smoke and ruin. Not a curse, not a burden, not a survivor. Thunderhawk stopped beside her. "You are not afraid," he observed. "I am," she answered honestly. "But I am more afraid of going back to who I was." His gaze softened. Something unspoken passed between them. Respect, recognition, thunder. Hawk had grown up under the teachings of his grandfather, a revered elder named Red Sovereign. The old man had believed that the Great Spirit spoke through signs in the land and in people. When Thunderhawk first saw Seraphina standing alone in that dusty settlement, chin lifted against a world that rejected her, he felt the echo of those teachings. Some spirits are forged in fire before they rise. He had not taken her as property. He had not seen her as a trade. He had seen destiny tangled in suffering. Iron Wolf called out from the far side of the ruins. "There are signs of struggle, but no bodies." Thunderhawk's expression darkened. Then they were taken. Seraphine's heart tightened. Taken meant unknown. Taken meant fear without answers. As they prepared to leave the valley, Thunderhawk turned to her. "The men who did this moved toward the Red Cliffs. That is near our homeland." She understood what he was not saying. Danger was no longer distant. It was approaching his people. "Why bring me into this?" she asked quietly. Thunderhawk did not hesitate. "Because you were already in it." The words lingered between them. The ride toward the cliffs felt heavier. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries echoing through the hills like restless spirits. Seraphine's thoughts tangled with questions. Why had Thunderhawk truly agreed to her father's offer? What had he seen in her that no one else had? And why did the rising conflict feel somehow connected to her own broken past? As night fell, they made camp beneath towering red stone formations. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light against cool rock. The warriors took turns keeping watch. The tension from Crow's Hollow hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Seraphina sat near the fire, staring into the flames. Thunderhawk joined her, close, but not touching. "In my village," he said quietly, "there is a story. It tells of a woman born under a storm. Her people feared her because lightning followed her cries, but the storm did not destroy her. It protected her." Seraphina felt her breath catch. "And what became of her?" she asked. Thunderhawk looked into the fire. the glow reflecting in his dark eyes. She led her people through their darkest season. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound from beyond the cliffs. Not coyote, not wind. Hoofbeats, distant, but real. Iron Wolf stood instantly, hand on his weapon. The other warriors rose in silence. Thunderhawk's gaze locked with Seraphine's. In that moment, under the vast western sky, with danger riding closer through the night and old wounds still bleeding unseen, she understood one thing clearly. Whatever she had been called in the past no longer mattered. The storm was coming again, and this time she would not face it alone. The hoofbeats grew louder against the canyon walls, echoing like drums of warning through the red cliffs. Every warrior in Thunderhawk's camp stood alert, their silhouettes sharp against the firelight. Seraphina felt the ground tremble beneath her boots, her pulse rising to match the rhythm of the approaching riders. Iron Wolf moved first, disappearing into the shadows with silent precision. Another warrior, Stormblade, climbed a ridge to gain a clearer view. The fire was quickly dimmed, leaving only faint embers glowing in the dark. The American frontier night swallowed everything except the sound of horses cutting through stone and dust. Seraphine's heart pounded, yet she did not retreat. She stood beside Thunderhawk, close enough to feel the heat of his body in the cold desert air. For a fleeting second, she remembered the settlement she had left behind. How the townsfolk had looked at her with suspicion, how her father had traded her like unwanted cargo. Now she stood at the edge of another world, and this world did not push her away. Thunderhawk leaned slightly toward her. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I will not run," she answered. His gaze flickered with something deeper than approval. It was a quiet acknowledgement of her strength. From the ridge, Stormblade signaled with a low whistle. 5 riders, he called softly. Not soldiers, not tribe. Bandits, then, or hired guns. The tension tightened. In recent months, rumors had spread across the frontier about a ruthless group led by a man called Black Viper. He was said to move between territories, stirring conflict between settlers and tribes for profit. Burn a ranch and blame the Apache. Ambush a caravan and leave false tracks. Chaos was good business. Thunderhawk had dismissed the rumors at first. The West was full of stories. But the ruins at Crow's Hollow felt too deliberate, too calculated. The riders emerged into view, silhouettes against the moonlit canyon entrance. They slowed when they saw the faint outline of the Apache camp. One of them raised a hand, signaling a halt. Seraphine's breath caught. She could not see their faces clearly, but she felt the weight of their presence. Predatory, watchful. Thunderhawk stepped forward, tall and unyielding. He did not draw his weapon. He did not speak. He simply stood. One of the riders dismounted and walked a few paces ahead of the others. His hat cast a shadow over his features, but his voice carried smooth confidence. "We mean no trouble," the stranger called out, "just passing through." Iron Wolf reappeared at Thunderhawk's side. "No one passes through these cliffs by accident," he replied. The stranger's gaze shifted, and for a split second, it landed on Seraphina. Even in the dim light, she felt it linger. "There's a price on this land now," the stranger continued. "New claims, new owners." Thunderhawk's voice was steady. "This land belongs to no man who burns homes." A silence fell, thick and charged. The stranger chuckled softly. "Careful, chief. Words can light fires." Seraphina felt anger rise in her chest. Fires had already been lit. Innocent families taken. Fear planted like seeds across the frontier. The rider mounted his horse again. "We'll be seeing more of each other," he said, before turning back toward the canyon entrance. The other riders followed, disappearing into the dark as quickly as they had come. The hoofbeats faded, but the threat remained. Stormblade climbed down from the ridge. "That was one of Black Viper's men," he said quietly. "I have seen him near the trading posts." Thunderhawk nodded once. Then the smoke at Crow's Hollow was no accident. Seraphina wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from realization. If Black Viper was setting settlers against Apache, then the fragile peace of the region was already breaking apart. And she, a girl sold by her father and taken in by Thunderhawk, stood at the crossing point of 2 worlds. Later, when the camp settled into uneasy rest, Seraphina walked alone toward the edge of the cliffs. The moonlight washed the desert in silver, turning the rugged landscape into something almost sacred. She breathed deeply, letting the vastness steady her thoughts. Footsteps approached behind her. Thunderhawk stopped a respectful distance away. "You should rest," he said. "I cannot," she replied. "If those men are trying to start a war, it will not stop at your people." He did not deny it. "My father will believe whatever they show him," she continued. "If they burn more ranches and leave signs pointing to the Apache, he will join the fight." Thunderhawk studied her profile against the moonlight. "You still care what he believes?" The question struck deeper than she expected. Gideon Vale had traded her without hesitation. Blood ties did not dissolve easily. "I care about what he might become," she said quietly. Grief already hardened him. Fear could finish the rest. Thunderhawk stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. The air felt charged, not with danger, but with something warmer. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, rough skin against soft. "You carry compassion for a man who gave you none," he said. "It is not for him," she whispered. "It is for the land. If war comes, no one wins." For a long moment, they stood there, the American West stretching endlessly around them. The scent of sage drifted on the breeze. Somewhere below, a river carved its patient path through stone. Thunderhawk felt the weight of leadership pressing heavier than ever. Protect his people, guard their homeland, resist the provocation of men like Black Viper, and now protect the woman who had entered his life like a storm with purpose. Behind them, in the shadowed camp, Iron Wolf spoke quietly with Stormblade. "She changes him," Stormblade murmured. Iron Wolf nodded. "Or perhaps she reminds him of who he was meant to be." But not all warriors were convinced. A younger fighter named Crimson Talon watched Seraphina with uncertainty. Had lost family in past conflicts with settlers. Trust did not come easily. To him, she represented risk, no matter how strong her spirit appeared. As dawn approached, a scout returned with troubling news. Smoke had been spotted near another ranch north of the cliffs. Settlers were gathering, armed and angry. Word was spreading that Apache warriors had been seen nearby. The trap was tightening. Seraphina felt the weight of it settle in her bones. She was no longer just a girl sold by her father. She was a bridge between two sides ready to tear each other apart. Thunderhawk gathered his warriors as the first light touched the canyon walls. His voice carried strength and restraint. "We do not strike first. We do not answer lies with fire. We watch. We prepare." Iron Wolf agreed, but concern etched his face. "If Black Viper pushes the settlers harder, they will come here." Thunderhawk's eyes shifted briefly to Seraphina. "When they do," he said quietly, "we will stand." In the distance, beyond the red cliffs and rising tension, Gideon Vale rode hard toward the nearest town meeting. Smoke had been seen. Rumors were spreading. Fear was turning into fury. He did not know that the men lighting the fires were the same ones who now circled the land like vultures. And he did not know that his daughter stood at the heart of a storm, far greater than the one that marked her birth. As the sun climbed higher over the frontier, casting long shadows across desert and ranch alike, the lines between truth and deception blurred further. The conflict was no longer distant. It was moving, deliberate and patient, toward collision. By midday, the Red Cliffs no longer felt like protection. It felt like walls closing in. Scouts returned one after another with the same report. Settlers were gathering near Dry Creek. Wagons circled, rifles stacked. Angry voices carrying across the wind. Smoke from 2 more ranches had blackened the sky at dawn, and false trails pointed straight toward Apache territory. Black Viper was not hiding anymore. He was pushing both sides toward collision. Thunderhawk stood at the highest ridge overlooking the canyon, the desert wind whipping his hair behind him. Below, his people prepared quietly. Women gathered children closer. Warriors checked horses and supplies. No one panicked, but everyone felt it. The old American frontier had seen many standoffs, but this one carried something heavier. This one felt engineered. Seraphina climbed the ridge to stand beside him. She had traded her blue settlement dress for a simple woven garment gifted by Iron Wolf's wife, Silver Dawn. The fabric moved with the wind, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel like an outsider wearing someone else's world. "They will come before sunset," she said softly. Thunderhawk nodded. "Gideon Vale rides with them." Her breath faltered at her father's name. She had expected it. Still hearing it spoken, made the reality sharper. "Does he lead?" she asked. "No," Thunderhawk replied. "But grief makes men follow the loudest voice." That loudest voice belonged to a rancher called Stone Mercer, a man who had lost cattle at Crow's Hollow and now blamed Apache warriors for every spark of flame. Black Viper had been seen near Mercer's land days before the first fire. The pattern was clear to Thunderhawk. It was not yet clear to the settlers. Seraphina stared across the distance where dust clouds already rose faintly. She imagined her father among them, jaw tight, pride wounded, convinced he was defending his people. He'd once taught her how to ride across open prairie, had once lifted her high as a child before grief swallowed him whole. "He will not listen to me," she whispered. Thunderhawk turned toward her fully. "He may not listen as a father, but he may listen as a man facing truth." Their eyes held. The tension between them had deepened over the past days, no longer only about danger. It was something more personal, more powerful. In quiet moments by the fire, they had spoken of loss, of responsibility, of dreams neither had dared to name. She had begun to see the leader beneath the warrior. He had begun to see the woman beyond the storm. Below them, Crimson Talon approached with urgency. Riders at the North Pass, at least 30. Thunderhawk's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "We meet them at the open ground. No arrows raised unless I give word." Crimson Talon hesitated. "If they fire first, then we defend. Not before." The warriors moved into position along the wide stretch of land between the canyon and the approaching settlers. It was open ground, chosen deliberately. No ambush. No shadows to hide in. Thunderhawk wanted visibility. He wanted truth to stand in daylight. Seraphina insisted on riding beside him. Iron Wolf frowned, but did not object. "If she speaks, some may listen," he said. The dust cloud thickened as the settlers approached. Horses snorted. Metal glinted under the sun. At the front rode Stone Mercer, his broad hat pulled low, rifle strapped across his back. Gideon Vale rode 2 places behind him, his expression carved from stone. When the two groups stopped facing one another, the air felt electric. Wind cut through the silence, carrying the scent of dry earth and rising tempers. Stone Mercer spoke first. "You burned our homes," he shouted. "You took our people." Thunderhawk did not raise his voice. "We burned nothing. Your enemy rides among you." Murmurs rippled through the settlers. Suspicion flickered, but anger was louder. Gideon Vale's eyes found Seraphina almost instantly. For a moment, everything else blurred. He had not expected to see her there, seated tall beside the Apache leader, her posture confident, her face unafraid. "Seraphina," he breathed, though the word barely carried. She nudged her horse forward slightly, breaking the line between the two sides. Thunderhawk did not stop her. "I am not a curse," she called out clearly, her voice steady across the field. "And the Apache are not your enemy." Stone Mercer scoffed. "You stand with them now?" "I stand with truth," she answered. Gideon felt something crack inside him. He had told himself she was better off gone, that trading her had been survival. But seeing her there, strong and unbroken, forced him to confront what he had done. Before he could speak, a gunshot rang out from the far ridge. The sound shattered the fragile balance. Horses reared. Men shouted. Another shot followed, striking the dirt near Thunderhawk's horse. The Apache warriors tensed, weapons half raised, but Thunderhawk's arms shot out, signaling restraint. From the ridge above, riders appeared. Black Viper's men. They had waited for the confrontation to peak. Chaos threatened to explode as settlers spun their horses in confusion. Some believed the Apache had fired. Others saw the direction of the smoke from the rifles above. Black Viper himself rode into view, dark coat sweeping behind him, a cruel smile visible even from a distance. "Seems you all need help deciding who to fight," he called mockingly. The trap revealed itself too late. More of his riders emerged behind the settlers, cutting off retreat. They had boxed both sides into the open ground. If panic took hold, blood would follow quickly. Thunderhawk's mind moved fast. This was the plan all along. Force confrontation, trigger violence, profit from the aftermath. Seraphina felt fear surge, but she forced herself to breathe. This was the storm. This was the moment she had sensed since childhood when lightning split the sky above her cradle. Gideon Vale looked between his daughter and the armed men surrounding them. For the first time, doubt overtook pride. Stone Mercer shouted orders, but his voice lacked certainty now. Black Viper raised his rifle, aiming not at Apache, not at settlers, but straight into the air. "Let the West burn," he declared. Thunderhawk leaned closer to Serafina. "Whatever happens next, stay near me." She met his gaze, heart pounding. "I am not afraid of the storm," she said. The tension stretched so tight it felt ready to snap. Warriors on both sides held their ground, waiting for the first true strike. Dust swirled violently between them, as if the land itself refused to stay still. Gideon slowly lowered his rifle. Iron Wolf shifted his stance, prepared to move at Thunderhawk's signal. Crimson Talon's grip tightened, his earlier doubts replaced by fierce loyalty. And above them all, Black Viper smiled, certain he had already won. The American frontier held its breath. One wrong move would ignite everything. Thunderhawk drew in a slow breath, his eyes never leaving the enemy on the ridge. The storm had arrived. The next heartbeat would decide whether it destroyed them all or forged something stronger from the fire. The next heartbeat did not bring gunfire, it brought a voice. "Look at where the shots came from," Serafina cried out, her words cutting through the chaos sharper than any weapon. "Not from the Apache. From the ridge. From the men who burned your homes." For a fraction of a second, time seemed to freeze across the open ground of the American frontier. Settlers twisted in their saddles, eyes lifting toward Black Viper's riders positioned above them. Smoke still drifted from their rifles. The angle was wrong for it to have come from Thunderhawk's line. Stone Mercer hesitated. He was angry, grieving, but he was not blind. He had hunted long enough to recognize direction and distance. Slowly, doubt crept across his hardened face. Gideon Vale looked at the ridge, then at his daughter. For the first time in years, he truly saw her, not as a curse, not as a burden, but as a woman standing brave between two worlds, risking herself to stop bloodshed. Black Viper realized the shift immediately. His smile faltered. "They lie," he shouted. "They stand together to fool you." Thunderhawk seized the moment. He rode forward alone, stopping at the very center of the field where both sides could see him clearly. He raised his empty hands. "We did not burn Crow's Hollow," he said steadily. "We found it in ashes." "Your enemy profits when you blame us," Iron Wolf signaled, toward the canyon pass. From behind the rocks, two Apache scouts emerged leading 3 frightened settlers who had been found hiding near the burned ranch days earlier. They had been sheltered, not harmed. One of the rescued men, Elder Boone, recognized Stone Mercer instantly. "It was not them," Boone called out hoarsely. "Masked riders, different horses." They laughed while they lit the fires. Murmurs swelled among the settlers. The fragile wall of anger began to crack. Black Viper cursed under his breath and signaled his men to move. But the ground had shifted beneath him. His plan depended on blind rage. Doubt was spreading like wildfire in the opposite direction. Gideon Vale nudged his horse forward until he was no longer behind Stone Mercer, but beside him. "We were led here," Gideon said, voice rough with realization. Used, Stone Mercer's grip tightened on his rifle, then loosened. His eyes flicked from Thunderhawk to the ridge. The real threat stood above them. Black Viper fired a warning shot into the dirt near the settlers, hoping to spark panic again. Instead, it sealed his betrayal. The bullet struck far too close to Mercer's own men. That was enough. Stone Mercer swung his rifle upward toward the ridge. "You played us," he shouted. In an instant, the standoff changed direction. Settlers and Apache warriors no longer faced one another, but turned toward the true enemy above. The tension that had nearly torn the frontier apart now focused on the men who had tried to profit from it. Black Viper realized his control was slipping. He barked orders to retreat, but the canyon pass he had relied on was no longer clear. Stormblade and Crimson Talon had already moved with precision, cutting off the narrow escape route without firing a single reckless shot. What followed was swift and decisive, but not reckless. Thunderhawk's warriors disarmed rather than destroyed. Settlers joined in, fueled not by hatred, but by the fury of betrayal. Black Viper's men scattered, their advantage gone. Within minutes, the ridge that had seemed so threatening fell silent. Black Viper himself attempted to flee through a rocky crevice, only to find Gideon Vale blocking his path. The two men locked eyes, one built from grief, the other from greed. "You nearly started a war," Gideon said, voice shaking not with fear but with anger at himself. "You burned my neighbors' homes." Black Viper smirked. "You were ready to do the rest." Gideon did not deny it. That was the hardest part. He had been ready. Behind him, Thunderhawk approached, calm but resolute. Together, without speaking, the two men forced Black Viper to surrender. The frontier had seen enough fire. By sunset, the open ground looked different. The anger that had once charged the air now felt replaced by exhaustion and uneasy understanding. Settlers gathered their people. Apache warriors returned to their lines. No victory cries rang out. Only relief. Stone Mercer approached Thunderhawk slowly. "We were wrong," he said plainly. "We let fear guide us." Thunderhawk inclined his head. Fear is a powerful enemy. It was not a grand speech. It did not need to be. The truth had been revealed in action. Gideon Vale dismounted and walked toward Seraphina. For a long moment, neither spoke. The red cliffs glowed behind her, and she looked stronger than he remembered, as if the land itself had claimed her. "I thought losing your mother was the worst thing that could happen," Gideon said quietly. "I blamed you because I could not fight the storm." Seraphina felt old wounds stir, but they no longer defined her. "I was never the storm," she answered gently. "I was only born in one." Tears gathered in Gideon's eyes, something she had never seen before. "I sold my own daughter." "You let fear speak louder than love," she replied. "But fear does not have to lead anymore." Gideon bowed his head. Redemption would not come in a single afternoon, but the first step had been taken. Thunderhawk stood a few paces away, giving them space. He had fought many battles in his life, but this one felt different. This one had been about more than land. It had been about breaking a cycle of hatred that threatened to consume everyone. As night settled over the American West, a small shared fire was lit between the two groups. It was not celebration. It was conversation. Stories exchanged, misunderstandings untangled. The beginning of fragile peace. Silver Dawn sat beside Seraphina, smiling softly. "You bridged two worlds," she said. Seraphina shook her head. They chose to listen. Thunderhawk approached then, his presence steady and warm. He did not speak grandly. He simply took her hand in his, openly now, before both settlers and tribe. "You were never a curse," he said quietly. "You're the light that ended one." His words were not poetic. They were honest. In the weeks that followed, efforts began to rebuild Crow's Hollow together. Apache hands and settler hands worked side by side, repairing fences and raising beams. The land that had nearly witnessed war now saw cooperation. Gideon Vale returned to his ranch changed. He no longer spoke of curses. He rode off into the edge of Apache territory, not as an enemy, but as a neighbor seeking trade and trust. Stone Mercer publicly admitted his error, a rare act of humility on the frontier, and Seraphina remained where her heart had chosen to stay. Under the vast western sky, beneath sunsets that once seemed like endings, she stood beside Thunderhawk as partner and equal. Their love was not rushed or dramatic. It grew steady and strong, rooted in shared trials and mutual respect. The legend that spread across the territory was simple. A girl once called cursed had become the reason the sides laid down their weapons. An Apache warrior had seen in her what others could not. Not a burden, not misfortune. A goddess of strength, not by birthright, but by courage. The frontier would always carry storms. Drought would come, disputes would rise, but something had shifted in that season. Fear no longer ruled the land. And in the quiet moments when the wind moved gently across the red cliffs, it carried not whispers of curses, but the steady promise of unity forged through truth, love, and the bravery to stand between worlds. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot and gives us the courage to create even more exciting tales.